Well, a warm welcome on my behalf, on my panelists' behalf, to this panel discussion on the China factor. I'm very thankful to the Paris Peace Forum for convening. I think it's the only dedicated China-specific discussion in these 2 days. So it's a great pleasure. We've heard speaking about China in various panels and discussions. For instance, in the Bridgetown to Accra discussion, or this morning among the 3 European ministers, there was discussion on China. So it's great that we can focus on China now, and it's great to see so much interest here. My name is Markus Herrmann Chen. I'm a Swiss-Chinese China analyst. I'm also the strategic advisor Europe for Caixin Media, China's leading financial media group, and a proud partner of the Paris Peace Forum. And it's in this capacity that I have the pleasure to moderate today's discussion. In terms of logistics, I want to remind you that we are live streamed in English right now. So also a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us digitally this discussion today afternoon. I'm also planning, and unless the dynamics are very special, but I'm really planning to have to take questions from you. I want you to get involved so you can raise questions to our distinguished panelists. We have, as a context, many factors that you've heard in many discussions, so I will skip them. I'll leave them analytically then also to my panelists. Maybe just the most recent one was very early this morning, when you have seen that President Xi and President Trump, they've been meeting, and President Trump was so bold to give a press, to interact with the press during a flight, a bumpy flight. We've seen in the video, if you had time to look at that. I would like to now introduce my 4 panelists. I'll start with, to my right, President of the Paris Peace Forum, obviously very known, Ángel Gurría. Previously Secretary General of OECD, but also Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Finance of Mexico. And then to his right, we have Maha Aziz, International Relations Professor in Global Risk at New York University, and also co-chair in AI Policy at the Digital Economist. Warm welcome. And then to the right side of Maha, we have Sergei Radchenko, Wilson E. Schmidt Distinguished Professor, School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, at Johns Hopkins University in DC in the US. Warm welcome. And then finally, lastly, we have Yuan Jiakai, flown in from Hong Kong, where he's based, Executive Director for the Finance Center for South-South Cooperation, and civil society practitioner with very international networks and a long-lasting relationship also with the Paris Peace Forum. So very warm welcome. I have one thing I want to, last thing I want to mention. I will ask my panelists first to talk a little bit about the context that we're in before then zooming into China. I think it's better embeds the analysis that my panelists have on China, and I would like to start with President Gurría with the first question. How do you characterize today's evolving international relations context in view of global governance and collaboration? Do we already have multipolarity, multipolar conditions? How are these coalitions shifting? Please, President.
Well, the international system is undergoing its most profound transformation since the end of the Cold War. The unipolar era was dominated by the United States, and then by a Western-led alliance and Western values, if you will. But right now, power is dispersed among, yes, the United States, which continues to be one of the leading powers, but also China, India, the European Union, but also emerging regional characters or emerging regional coalitions. And it used to be that the UN dominated and the IMF had something to do with things financial, And the OECD, which I led during 15 years, used to tell everybody what they should be doing. But they are rebalanced today by, for example, the BRICS. That's a reality. The US dollar, by the way, used to represent about 75% or 80% of the deals in the world. Now it represents maybe 60, moving into 50%. So there's more balance there. The African Union, MIKTA, of course, where Mexico, it starts with Mexico, and Indonesia, and Korea, and Turkey, and Australia. So this diffusion of power is good, but it creates it creates many complications to have a consensus. And global challenges like climate, it took, I think, 4 years or something like that to achieve the treaty on health, recently terminated or recently finished. But it does not have operational clauses. So we still have to work on that. And it was very, very difficult. Technology, inequality, all require cooperation. But they require cooperation, but it's more and more difficult to get that kind of cooperation. Now, the task ahead is not to resist multipolarity, but how do we make the best of it? How do we make the best out of it? So how do we shape it? And how do we ensure that this multipolarity evolves towards an open, predictable, cooperative order that strengthens global order and governance rather than fragmented, rather than become a mess?
Thank you, President Gurría. I think I hear it's not a state of multipolarity, but it's a state of shaping towards multipolarity and needs to be done constructively. Let's go straight into a Chinese perspective. I would like to ask Yuan Jiakai. The Chinese Communist Party just concluded its 4th plenum, and they are just ahead of the 15th five-year plan, 2026 until 2030. How much is China, in fact, absorbed by its domestic challenges and domestic development priorities? Or how does China look at this global context?
Thank you. I think for Chinese, our way of doing things are very consistent. That's why, I mean, we can actually have a 5-year development plan, and this is the 15th version of the development plan. And going back to your question on China's challenges, I would say excessive production, insufficient domestic consumption, and our demographic is shifting. We're aging very quickly, and I mean, all these challenges, I think it will take China many years to figure out, I mean, how to deal with them. So I would say the external environment is changing so rapidly. Even though, I mean, today, as you said, we had the positive meeting between President Xi and President Trump. But I looked at the stock market. Apparently, the stock market is not reflecting the positiveness.
Chinese stock market or
globally. I would say, I mean, investors in general still cautious because I mean, something agreed today might change the next day, and I think over the if I remember correctly, today's meeting is the first meeting in 6 years between President Xi and President Trump. So I think China has learned to be patient. And really, instead of sort of constantly reacting to the changing world, I mean, I think China's sort of, kind of priorities can be better achieved by focusing on the self, because we do have a lot of challenges to deal with.
Thank you, Jiakai. So consistency and focus that you describe in how Chinese policymakers need to primarily focus on the domestic side. If we now switch to Maha, and let's zoom out a little bit from China and just benefit from your global risk lens. How do you view the evolving IR context and these new coalitions? Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. So, of course, some of what I'm saying overlaps with what the other speakers have said, but definitely there's no question that there has been a decline in U.S. hegemony, steady challenges to its geopolitical, political, economic, and social power around the world. In fact, at NYU and with some external research partners, we've tried to track the intensity in terms of the challenges to U.S. hegemony in a post-Cold War hegemonic index. You know, as you can imagine, the challenges escalated with September 11, the global financial crisis, Trump 1.0, and so forth. I think that while there is value in looking at the world through the lens of multipolarity, and recognizing also that prior to the pandemic, many of us were simply saying the world in 2020s would be defined by bipolarity, US versus China, tech Cold War. A lot has changed, perhaps since the pandemic. It does seem insufficient to simply look at the world through a multipolar and bipolar lens. Perhaps it's becoming more polycentric, where you have multiple state actors, including smaller states, and non-state actors who are driving global change. I know we've put the pandemic behind us, but if you recall, in that first year of the pandemic, many of us felt incredible frustration about the big powers and big institutions for failing to tackle the situation. And we did see other types of actors step up, whether it was tech leaders, local civil society leaders, CEOs. Similarly with Ukraine, we saw that tech leaders, in a way, were acting like diplomats for their own countries. Elon Musk, everyone is aware of him, of course. He offered satellite internet to Ukraine, changing the nature of the war, just as Microsoft approached the government days before the invasion to move their data to the cloud. Again, tech leaders acting like diplomats of their own countries. And even AI diplomacy, if you look around the world, it's not just about US and China. You see countries, smaller states like the UAE, engage in AI diplomacy with respect to, you know, acting like an AI hub for the global South. And I think this is positive. So it's not just about the US and China. There are other drivers of global change, and I think this is ultimately positive for us. It could be that this is leading towards an era of empowerment for more actors, and I think that's very positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha. So if I understand it correctly, polycentricity means it's a broader framework that shows that there's more actors involved than just multipolarity. It would also just pick up on how you reacted to the question. I think it would also be a surprise to go so fast into multipolarity just within so little time. I think that's why we need this analytical conceptualization of what we are in. I think it's important. So thank you very much. If we go to Sergey, and we need to benefit also from your expertise specifically in the Cold War that you have been studying for a long time, I want to ask you also, how would you characterize today's international relations context? How is it different from the Cold War? And what did you learn from analyzing the Cold War that can help us better anticipate what we are in this process and where this is going? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Markus. It's good that you left the historian for the last, because the historians tend to say the most outrageous things. So there's a great debate at the moment between historians and political scientists as to whether the moment we are in today is similar to the Cold War. Is it another Cold War? Is it something like that, or is it something completely different? People who say that it's very different say, well, no, the world is much more interconnected today. It's much more interconnected during the Cold War. Therefore, there's a greater interdependency between different parts of the world and between the key actors. That's different from the Cold War. They also say that today China's ideological menace, shall we say, is not on the same order of magnitude like what the Soviets posed to the West, what the Soviets posed to the United States. And so some people will say, no, it's a different world, and we should not use the same conceptions like the Cold War to talk about the moment we're living in today. We're just not reliving the same history. However, there are also certain continuities. Today we have a comprehensive global competition between China and the United States. It's an economic competition, it is a technological competition, it is a military competition. That is very similar to the Cold War. A direct conflict between these two powers, a direct war, is something verging on the unthinkable because of nuclear weapons, because of other forms of technology. Therefore, there's greater resort to proxy conflicts, and that too is rather similar to the Cold War. So there are similarities and differences. Fundamentally, I would say that when we have the United States and China that are engaged in a strategic competition that will change and determine the face of the 21st century, that I think is somewhat similar to the way that the strategic competition between the Soviet Union and the United States played out during the Cold War. So I'm more for similarities than for differences. Now, then the next question, in this case, well, what do you propose? How do you handle this situation? And the scary word that comes to mind is called containment. And you will say, well, wait a second. What are you talking about? That's, wouldn't it be better to have win-win cooperation? And I will say, yes, of course. You can have win-win cooperation on some distinct issues, like, for example, climate change. Or, for example, China and the United States can at least come to an agreement not to nuke one another. That would be very helpful. Perhaps even arms control. That's not on the cards yet. They can cooperate in tackling global pandemics, although recent experience suggests that this might be very, very difficult. Fundamentally, however, we will have difficulties because strategic competition in itself suggests that there is no win-win cooperation fundamentally in this. It's sort of like the Chinese saying, you cannot have two tigers live on one mountain, right? You know this Chinese saying, of course. Yes, there's many other Chinese sayings that suggest the same thing, and so it becomes very, very difficult under those conditions to attain this bright world that we all would like to see. And the question then becomes, well, what do you propose? Containment, is that bad? Yes, there are different forms in containment. There's a militarized containment that we saw during the Cold War that led to crises, showdowns, like we had on the Cuban Missile Crisis in the late 1950s, early 1960s. That was very bad, and I hope we don't have to live through that moment again. But there are also other forms, such as the more milder forms, such as we had during the détente period between the Soviet Union and the United States in the 1970s, when the two powers actually were able to cooperate on key issues while even pursuing their strategic interests. So I'm fundamentally a realist. That's why I'm at the Henry Kissinger Center for Global Affairs, and I see. And I see that we're facing problems as we face the future. I think it's useful to be realistic about where we're heading.
Thank you, Sergey. If you keep the microphone, I want to press you still on one label, because we heard shaping multipolarity, we heard polycentricity, and then we heard also the Chinese view of focusing on domestic, and I extrapolate from there, Jakai is hoping for a favorable external environment. What label do you put on the international relations setting right now? What is it?
Well, it depends on where you sit, right? For example, if you sit somewhere in the global south, you will say, yes, it's a multipolar world, everybody's happy, you know, there's greater diffusion of power, and that is good for everyone. And perhaps you might even say that there's greater diffusion of power than we had during the Cold War, when the system was, at least in part, bipolar system. And so you could say that this is a major point of difference between the Cold War and now. If you are sitting in China, and I would think probably have to refer to Jakai on this, but I think from China's perspective, it's more of a Sino-American world. Those are the two great powers, and everybody else is supposed to defer to them. I think that's how they think about the world. And as for the United States, well, you know how the United States thinks about the world. It is basically, the 21st century is going to be about the United States and China. This is how it's going to play out. The rest of you guys, good luck to you, but you will have to, you'll have to figure it out.
Great, thank you for these clarifications. Let's go to a second round, and as I was saying, let's now zoom in closer to China against the context that we've discussed. First question I want to throw to President Gurría is on China. Against the IR context you have described, how do you see China's rise and its ambitions? What does China want? What can it give? And how will the world accommodate that?
China's rise is reshaping the international order. That's a reality. The fact that Xi and Trump signed, what they signed, not many people, because it just happened today, Korea time, but they signed something that, an agreement that defers for 1 year the ban on rare earths. No, this for 1 year. So where does that leave us? In 6 months' time, we'll start thinking about the renewal or not the renewal, and therefore the big problem. But it's a beginning, and it's good, because it avoided a number of other things, which including the fact that the U.S. was absolutely ready to jack up the tariffs on everything else. Now, what became as an economic transformation has become a broader strategic project. It's economic, and it's technological, and yes, it's geopolitical. And of course, we agreed that China was one of the multipolars right now. But with multipolar comes multipower. And therefore, China is exerting its muscle, exerting its multipower. The fact that it's multipolar has some consequences, which we are seeing now. And the problem that some people don't like the fact that the multipolarity is expressing and extending its muscles and flexing its muscles, etc. Now, I have to say, Belt and Road, for example. Now, the Belt and Road made huge inroads into Africa, into Latin America, into Asia, etc. Now, the problem is we've had about 10 years of Belt and Road or something like that. And the problem is that now there are 150 billion of debts of the developing world to China. And the problem is that sometimes China is, owning the infrastructure or the facilities because the country, the local country, could not pay it. So people are interpreting this as, you know, Belt and Road verboten. But the problem is, how do you deal with it? Because, again, debt is like a loaded gun, yes, but you could use it to shoot the thieves out of your house, or you could use it to shoot yourself, or, you know, so the question is, how do you use it best? How do you use it better? The world must, therefore, you know, without too many expectations, welcome China's rise. I think the world, in a way, it's inevitable that China is up and coming. But the fact is not if China will lead. But the question is, how will China lead? How will China exert its power? How will China flex its muscles? How? And again, you know, the multipolar world has to, we agreed that we're in a kind of transition, not necessarily already there, and therefore the question is, how do you shape the fact that one of two, because the other one is, as Mr. Radchenko said, the United States, one of two has already established its values, flexed its muscles, etc., etc., etc. But the other one is kind of trying, but the first one is trying to avoid it. This is what is causing the tension, and this is what is causing the problems today. So the answer to that tension, the answer is you know, whether multipolarity becomes a source of collaboration, or, unfortunately, a contest for dominance.
Thank you, President Gurría. So you said we have to welcome it, but we have to watch the how. You put a lot of emphasis. I just want to pick up two quick thoughts. I think on the debt. I mean, debt can be an expression of very smart investments. Debt is just, it is an agency that you take. And the second point I want to link what you have said, we heard it yesterday in the panel with Cesar Amorim, the Brazilian colleague. I'm quoting him, he said he thinks that effective multilateralism, the underlying power structure is actually multipolarity. He said it in the public panel yesterday. I thought it was interesting to link that to your comment. Please.
The problem is that there are 150 billion now of debts to China. Now, we used to have, those of us who had to distribute or redirect or renegotiate our debts. We used to go first to the Paris Club. And the Paris Club used to be made of all the export-import agencies of the developed countries in the world. But now, without China, You cannot go to the Paris Club because it doesn't make any sense. Because you would leave out billions and billions and billions, hundreds of billions perhaps, of debts that would not be incorporated. So just an example, a little bit of an example of how the world has changed.
Thank you for nuancing this thought on the debt. Let's go to Jiakai, Yuan Jiakai. China has been proposing a variety of global initiatives: global governance initiative, global security initiative, global development initiative, global civilization initiative. How is China pursuing influence in global governance versus building its own coalitions right now, in your view?
Thank you. First of all, I want to go back to like the "no two tigers in one mountain" saying. I think that the challenge China is facing right now is being the second largest economy. It doesn't matter what you do, you just cannot be ignored, right? I mean, some people are going to like you, some people are not going to like you. So I think that's the one challenge that China is facing right now. And the second challenge is the past 40 years, I mean, our economic growth had a lot to do with our bilateral relationship with the US. But now the world is shifting. And I think China is learning, to make more friends. I think these are sort of in my perspective as a Chinese, I mean, that's how I see the sort of the fundamentals. Going back to global governance, because I'm from the civil society, I just wanted to share a little bit about sort of the civil society community in China and also overseas. In 2008, it was really the beginning of China allowing foundations to be established. Usually we see that as the sort of starting of the civil society in China, and now we have about 10,000 foundations in China. But one observation that I have is a lot of the Chinese philanthropy tends to be very regional. So if a company is in one province, then usually it would only give money to this province versus elsewhere. Mm-hmm. I think that explains a bit about Chinese sort of a traditional mindset. Historically, we're a inward-looking country. We're not a very outward-looking country. But in recent years, I think things are changing a little bit. Because I think that has to do with a lot of Chinese companies going overseas. And the real example that I can share today is we're working actually with one of the largest Chinese construction machinery company. And now 50% plus of its revenue actually comes from outside of China. And in Indonesia, it has 2,000 employees. Mm. So when Chinese companies start to generate significant revenue from outside China, then, you would imagine, these Chinese companies would have to be part of the global community and think about how to contribute back to local communities. So right now, we're actually working with this Chinese company and also in partnership with OECD. And we are thinking how this Chinese company can address the youth employment challenge in Africa through vocational training. So my observation is this is really the first wave of Chinese private enterprises entering the global governance conversation. I completely agree. A lot of things, my peer Paz just said about Belt and Road, but those are government actions. But I think when you have more and more different stakeholders into this global governance conversation, I think it becomes a much more balanced situation.
Great. Thank you for giving it this twist and showing a completely different example of where China is engaging and how it is expanding. Let's go to Maha and link to polycentricity. We talked about it earlier. If you can take this concept and say, how are interactions from countries or regions or smaller regions towards China? And maybe you can apply it into the AI policy, which is a field that you know best.
Sure. I think, as everyone knows, countries are racing to develop their AI capability. And I think in that haste, they may start to develop AI infrastructure dependencies, including on countries like China. As you know, China has been engaged in a digital Silk Road for many years, and it could be that while traditional foreign aid is drying up, we are now entering an era of new aid dependencies, specifically focused on AI. In our work at NYU, we've tried to track AI as aid, as a form of aid, in terms of infrastructure, and China is number one. China has been number one, certainly in the last year, in terms of hardware and network development. But it creates dependency risks. The AI that's being passed on is single vendor ecosystems. The recipient nations have limited control of the models, and it is concerning to what extent that will that lead to more aid dependencies, but just more focused on AI. So just something to keep in mind.
Great, thank you, Maha. Going to Sergey, what is the role of the Sino-Russian relationship? That's your second big research topic in today's evolving world order. What does it say about how developing and developed countries should look at China? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Markus. That's a difficult question, I have to say. We'll start by saying that China and Russia appear to share a vision of the world order. I would say that they want the United States mainly unseated from its glorious perch in the world order. Beyond that, I think there's limited scope there for an alignment of views. It is true that China and Russia want a world order where their regimes are secure, are safe and secure. But whereas Russia, for example, likes to export its model of corrupt kleptocracy to other countries, China does nothing like that. China is not interested in exporting its model of governance. It's one example where their views do not necessarily coincide. Whereas China, as I mentioned, sees the world as basically a Sino-American world where the two great powers contend for power and influence. Russia would prefer to see a multipolar world of which it is a pole. Unfortunately, it probably doesn't really have. Russia always has greater ambition than it has the means. Yeah. So in the struggle of tigers, Russia is a cat, and so China sort of takes it for granted. So there's a bit of a problem there. But, you know, China and Russia have complementary economies. Now, that is where you see real cooperation. It's not going away. They are not competing in any shape or form in economic terms. And they've also learned something from their difficult history, because historically, those are two countries that actually, in living memory, had a war. They had a border war. They nearly, you know, the Russians were thinking of carrying out a nuclear strike against China if you go back to 1969. So they've learned that it's better for neighbors like that to live in you know, with reasonable accommodation and concern for each other's interests, because if they do have a split, then third parties, i.e. the United States, will take advantage of this. They're even, I mean, the United States is trying to drive a wedge between them. If you go to Washington, you know, every second taxi driver is a Kissinger who's trying to split China and Russia. But it's not, you know, it's not working at the moment, because I think they understand that this good, positive relationship isn't to their benefit. Now, what can other countries learn from this? I think they can learn the following: that China does one thing very well. It looks after its own interests. It does it better than many others. And but it does it, you know, it does it in a kind of unassuming fashion. You look, you know, this relationship between a tiger and a cat. The Chinese are really not drive. They drive hard bargain economically, like Power of Siberia 2 is one example of that. But generally speaking, they defer to Russia, and they give Russia a certain strategic space and certain respect. The Russians save their face, so to speak, to misuse a Chinese phrase. And so I think that's good for the relationship.
Thank you, Sergey, for your analysis. Sorry, I should have pre-announced it, but we would like to take now one or two questions, depending. Okay, we have one question here and the second in the back. If we have these two questions, and let's take them together, and you can also say whom you're addressing your question to. Is there a microphone in the room? Yes.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dylan Carlson. I work at International Crisis Group. I have a more general question. We've looked at China primarily here in this panel as an economic and technological power. And I'm wondering, when you oppose China and the US has also not only claimed the privileges of being a superpower, but also taken up the responsibilities of being a superpower over the past 70 years. And my question is, at what point will China begin also taking up the responsibilities of being a superpower, not just in the economic and technological spheres, but also in peace and security, beyond its kind of neighborhood or closer neighborhood? Thank you.
Thank you for the first question. We also get the second question.
Hi, the question is for Mr. Rodchenko. You spoke about how China does not want to export its model of governance, or at least much less than the USSR. I'm wondering if you think that this detail, it seems, is often forgotten in analysis where they compare the situation we're living in now with the Cold War, and if kind of bypassing this I think important aspect that it's not the same situation has any dangerous effects on how policymakers will see this and interpret it and then act on the situation.
Thank you for the second question. Sergei, do you want to take the second first, and then we will discuss who wants to comment the first one, please.
But I really also wanted to comment on the first one, but very briefly.
You can be one of those who comments on the first one. Yes.
Okay, I will very briefly to this. I know, yes, this aspect is often neglected, but I did not neglect it in my comments. Is that this is a difference with the Cold War. I mean, history. When we go back to history and we look for lessons to enlighten us today, sometimes we tend to import ideas and analogies that simply don't work. History is very, very complicated, and if you want to justify your actions today by finding something in history, you can do it for any action, whether it's engagement, appeasement, confrontation, containment. You'll find lots of examples in history. So yes, it's different, but I also pointed in my comments to some similarities between the Cold War and today.
Thanks. If I just paraphrase the first question, I think there was a question of how China is a big country. In Chinese, I would say 大国, as a big country, superpower. How does China see itself? And the second one, second prong of it is, what are dimensions where China is or wants to contribute to global goods, like and beyond the region? Who would like to comment this question? Yes, President Gurría, and then Jakai, and then yes. Oh, so everyone a brief comment. Thank you.
Well. It's about responsibility of being big. And I believe that it comes with a job, in a way, that you grow into it because of unexpected consequences. Because suddenly, you're owed 150 billion from practically every single developing country in the world. Or you are the main trading partner of 120 countries in the world, including all of South America. That has consequences. And it also forces you to be consequential with your own behavior. So my impression is that responsibility grows. The United States was not necessarily responsible at the very beginning for all that it did, but it now has become much, even with Mr. Trump, I have to say, it has become much more consequential in terms of looking at the consequences of its own actions. And I have to say, if one sees temperance and if one sees moderation, even with Mr. Trump, it has to do with the fact that the United States is acting consequentially.
Thank you, President Gurría. I was planning to have a closing round, but let's combine. My closing question would have been, where do you hope China to engage? What's a global issue? So if you can just add one word, and then this is then your closing word, and we go to each speaker. You can comment the first question, but also give this one keyword. Where do you want China to be engaged? One global challenge.
I hope that they continue to engage with the United States and that they perfect the instruments and that, again, they are responsible for their own actions and therefore they take a look at what they have agreed, because right now it looks like China is more passive, whether, we know it's not, but it looks like the United States is the one that is being more active in proposing.
Thank you.
Just
please.
going back to the earlier question, I think, of course, China is a tech and economic power, but it's worth acknowledging that China has funded leadership schools in Africa, from what I've been told, to educate people there about their particular ideology. In the same way that the US, at least in the past, pre-Trump era, did engage in democracy promotion around the world. So I think it's interesting to bring that up. And second, I would say that China is, it seems, wanting to be peacemaker. I mean, I know it didn't work out, but it did put forth a peace accord, a list of peace recommendations for Ukraine, and I think that's significant. In terms of the key issue that China should be involved with, I'm super concerned about AI unemployment. I know that everyone is talking about it. Just today, they announced more layoffs at major US companies, but we're not appreciating the psychological toll that this will take, and this will lead to unrest in many countries. I'd love to see a global AI workforce compact that protects the worker and potentially involves a big power like China, because otherwise we are heading for a very a period of heightened unrest as the years go on with AI unemployment.
Thank you, Maha. Sergey?
So I think that China is a tiger that behaves like a cat, and nowhere is it more clear than the conflict in Ukraine. I think if China wants to be respected as a global power, as a superpower, it must do much, much more to contribute to the resolution of this conflict. What they're doing is not nearly enough. It's not nearly enough, and it shows that China simply doesn't know how to do that, doesn't know, or maybe doesn't want to. So one word is Ukraine.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think even though China is the second largest economy in the world, but China is still, at least according to our own standard, we're still a developing country, right? I mean, if you divide our GDP by the number of people that we have, I mean, there's still a lot of things that have to be fixed. So I think that's number one. Number two is I hope people here realize that when the number one GDP or economy is focusing on you for the past 6 or 7 years, life is not easy, right? So I think how to deal with this shift is taking a lot of China's energy and also attention. So I did two things, but I totally agree that even with all the Chinese, our own challenges, and also dealing with the ongoing tension between China and US, China should be more active. I mean, engaging global governance conversations, totally, as President said that, I mean, power comes with responsibility. I totally agree with that. One area I really hope China can be active in is keep higher education exchange open. Because I think the world's becoming more and more difficult. The last thing we want is not letting young people, I mean, talk to each other.
Thank you, Jacques. So this brings us to the end of our time. Thank you very much to the Paris Peace Forum for curating this discussion. And please join me in applauding my panelists. Thank you.